You have an idea for a product. Think you can make it big in the market. So, you want to make a startup with this idea. Well, what would be one of the biggest problems that will be faced by entrepreneurs? Well, if you've done your research, then it would be that millions of startups fail because they don't manage to secure funds to invest in it. So, let's get on with the main purpose of this video, startup funding. Let's imagine a guy named Steve who makes burgers but has no funds to make it big. So he decides to secure funds. He starts the business with a little amount of money that he has with him or by borrowing from friends and family. This is considered as a seed capital or initial capital. He opens a store in the city, but it produces very little revenue. But he believes that his burgers are the best and decides to expand his business. This is when he decides to accept a Series A financing. Here, venture investors and angel investors invest in Steve's business because they believe it's the best too. This is done in exchange of a share in the business. This capital helps Steve to expand the business to 2 other cities, hire more people, and he also has the capital to experiment on various other tastes. Now that the business is booming, Steve decides to make it even bigger by expanding it into other states. So, he accepts a Series B financing. With this, he hires more people, opens new shops, brings out a new menu, etc. Now, Steve is a millionaire with various shops around the country and he has a name for himself. So, he's either preparing the company to offer shares to the public in a new stock issuance or believes the company has more growth potential. Thus, he accepts a Series C financing to further expand the business into the foreign market, example the USA. Now, Steve has some stores in the US, but it's not doing as good as it did in India. So, he decides to accept a Series D financing, which he uses to change the menu to suit to the customer's taste, hire more staff, and opens more trendy stores to attract customers. This is one scenario, but what if Steve fails to make it big in the US market and as a result loses capital? Well then, he would have to accept a Series D financing to save the company. Well, if Steve needs a Series E financing, then it means that Steve has failed or wants to remain private or needs that final push before preparing the company to offer shares to the public.
Now let's talk about the second type of funding, which is crowdfunding. In the past, shipping a product or building a company was for only those who had the money or those who could attract investments. So let's imagine Steve makes VR headsets but is rather poor, so he isn't able to secure any seed capital or initial capital. So he logs onto an online crowdfunding platform and gains small amounts of capital from thousands and thousands of supporters. So this can be done in 3 ways. First one being is a donation-based crowdfunding. Steve could have used this if he was building a hospital for the poor or an organization that cleans the oceans. In this, the supporters do not expect any financial return except the information and feedback about the good deeds these campaigns have enabled. The second type is the reward-based crowdfunding. Steve can use this type by providing the supporter with some kind of reward like a free VR headset or whatever he is making. The third type is equity-based crowdfunding. Steve could use this type of funding if he is willing to provide a part of the shares of the company in return for the capital. The third type of funding is loan. In this type, Steve can borrow money but has to return it in the future within an agreed time with a decided interest. This is one of the best methods when Steve is just starting with the business but is rather stable enough to apply for a loan. So here is a general breakdown of the main types of small business startup loan. 1. Steve could apply for a SBA loan as long as he is able to satisfy all the conditions. Second, he could also take loans by using credit cards but has to pay a defined minimum portion of the amount or else penalties are imposed. Next, he could also take short-term loans, which are relatively small amounts of money that have to be paid back within 3 to 18 months. Getting money in the form of loans or investments from families and friends can be another option which Steve can consider. All these types of funding are mainly used for seed capital or initial capital.
Now let's take Steve to the fourth type of startup funding, that is venture capital. This mainly focuses on high risks and high returns. Let's bring back the old example of Steve's Burgers. In this, Steve would ask a private investor, Jake, a venture capital of 10 lakh rupees as a seed capital. But as an incentive, Steve will make Jake a part owner, thus having a say in the dealings of the shop and having a share of 50%. He would also provide returns corresponding to the shop's ROI after the first 2 months. Jake could accept it, but it is rather risky as he is providing a decently large amount of money and there is no guarantee that the shop would become big. But he still decides to accept it. Now, Steve's shop is doing pretty well, but Jake doesn't think the shop will go far, so he decides to pull out of the company. Since the shop has 50% ROI after the first 2 months, Jake walks away with 50 lakh rupees, which is 5 times the amount he originally invested.
Last type of funding which Steve should know is angel investor. Angel investors are often retired entrepreneurs or executives who partake in angel investing for reasons that are beyond monetary return. These investors participate in the funding of a startup company because they believe in the business idea or in the person who invented it, and they can offer a one-time investment to get the business moving. So Steve could use this type if he has a little access to capital and if the angel investor is interested in his work. The investor would provide the capital in more favorable conditions than any other lender. In return, Steve would have to give ownership in the form of stock. But Steve might lose some control on the shop if the angel investor monitors the shop a little too closely. So after getting to know all these different kinds of funding, we hope both Steve as well as you folks can make a right decision whenever the need comes.